Reading the chats.
Oh, yes, I can see it. Is that going live? And I wonder if we can tell when people show up.
Yeah, I think they're going to keep giving us prompts.
Mhm.
Did you do a work with Zoom or on Zoom?
Yes, that was the reality show about online gig workers. So the
That's
last one
probably okay.
I showed was all produced by Zoom.
Okay.
But I'm happy to learn about this StreamYard one because it does seem like it.
Yeah, we'll see.
Like it's better for replays of video and for having a little more control over the broadcast.
I heard about Flipgrid today. Have you heard of that?
No. What's that?
I think it's a way for students to upload their videos so that there's no problem with the sound and all of the. It gives you a good signal and a good playback. So many new technologies.
Yeah, all the new platforms, making everything more accessible, but perhaps overwhelming too. So it's that much colder in Vermont.
Yeah, this week has so far been pretty tough. It's going to warm up a bit, but and now there's snow pretty much on the ground the whole time.
We've got some frost over here.
What is good, Prof? What did you think, Ian? Put something in the chat reaction.
Should we? Does that meet the threshold? 15 people to start chatting.
So far, I'm not happy with the attendance, but I'm not.
Oh, it's growing.
I have to. It's gonna. Your talk is gonna stay online for a while.
Oh, yeah.
So some people are going, okay, here's Grove Young saying, hi, thank you for presenting for our school. I really enjoyed the primal therapy piece. How different do you think it would have gone if it was set up during the 2020 elections?
I think that there's a lot more anger that's been built up over the last 4 years. And so for that primal therapy piece, I collaborated with a therapist, life coach named Valerie Bell. And we did a number of public workshops together, maybe just a few over the years. And then I also worked with some other therapists. Hi.
I tried to do it on the chat and it didn't work.
So I worked with a few other therapists in other countries to do.
You want me to try again?
To offer public workshops with members of the public within the installation. But actually, so Valerie and I did the first public workshop at one of BAM's smaller theaters in like the lobby area. I think it was 2 or 3 days before the 2016 election, and that was what haunted me after, is how people were not at all angry. We had a great discussion, but they didn't have pent up emotions to release. It was more a kind of demoralization. One person I remember saying, Trump is telling Trump directly that he was the president America deserves. But at that moment, none of us thought he would become the president. But yeah, I think this is something that, I just watched that much talked about documentary, The Social Dilemma, last night, and that's, something that film touches on, how easy it is to foster this kind of inflammation. And that's something I've been thinking a lot about and writing about over the last year or two, coming off of this last project, is this kind of trend towards anti-inflammatory diets and self-care treatments. And I really think that I've come to think that is a way of sort of psychically mitigating the inflammation of our political discourse and public conversation. I think I wouldn't do that project now. It became too on the nose, the week after I finished it. So it's hard to exactly say, but I'm living in an area right now where there is a lot more difference of opinion, and I wonder sometimes, I think after the fact, I'll be surprised by. I think yesterday, someone told me that they, on the phone, they were like, "Oh, actually, I'm not available because I have a positive COVID test, but I have no symptoms. I think it's all a hoax anyway." And it keeps catching me off guard. And I, hung up the phone and thought, I got to talk to him again and try to offer some alternative perspectives. But, I've been, surprised how challenging it is in the moment when you really do confront people you disagree with, how to, it's easier said than done engaging in that way because people are so polarized, and it's also can easily be so patronizing to speak to someone and try to show them the light. So I do think there's a need for alternative models that offer a platform for these conversations right now beyond the social media platforms. But yeah, it seems like there's some more questions.
Yeah, that actually leads into the next question from Joseph Jornek. Would you have done your real life project differently in the current COVID-19 climate?
I think this is, I have a very similar answer to this one, that it was, I suppose this keeps happening, and I suppose it's perhaps normal that when you choose to work on with subject matter and methods that are quite topical, that the context shapeshifts, beneath your feet, or behind you, or all around you, right? Mm-hmm. So Zoom seemed like a more esoteric, corporate video conferencing system that all of these life coaches and sort of wellness gurus were also using. So it was quite unexpected and strange that, I spent a ton of time last year on Zoom. I didn't expect it to come back around. It's beyond Zoom. Of course, that our more isolated lifestyle, for many of us, we've entered into a more isolated lifestyle that is akin to what I was looking at with many of the creative professional gig workers. So I think I have the same answer if I wouldn't do it now, but yeah, but I do think it's very relevant to this moment.
Yeah. Okay, they're streaming in a lot of questions. So we have maybe 10 more minutes or so. So one student, it's without identifying themselves, said, "I thought the presentation was good. She's very talented and unique. The Venn diagram really struck out to me. Was that based on analytical and scientific study on society?"
That came from looking at many of these different personality testing consulting firms. And I was interested in how they seemed to adapt and appropriate visual vernacular from astrology and I Ching and other sort of more alternative, and in some cases spiritual practices, and that I was curious about this real fusion of corporate culture and countercultural practice that much of which had burgeoned in the 70s as kind of part of post-hippie new left mentality and practice. But I feel like I'm going off on a tangent. Let me get back to the question. Oh, about where the Venn diagram came from. So yeah, many of these firms, used. I kept just pouring over and doing as many personality testing tests or diagnostics as I could, and that was came out of an amalgam of all of that research. And then I also thought that vibed nicely, or had synergy with, to use their kind of lingo, the color-coded system that already exists at the Pompidou in Paris. Where the water lines are marked in blue, and there's a whole architectural strategy for color coding that building. And I had to mess with, I had to think about, using different colors than, I wasn't going to use the primary colors they use. I had to use the ones next to them on the color wheel. And it was really to give this pseudoscientific legitimacy to my own political cosmology, as they did.
All right. Our convener, Anne Lepore, for Visual Arts, says, "Thank you for preparing this interview for us. As a screen-based artist, how do you battle screen fatigue? Speaking of funny goop-type upgrades, how do you refresh when you have digital burnout?"
Yeah, that question really resonates, because I don't know. I'm trying to remember, because I did not rewatch the presentation just now. I had to make sure I was ready for the live broadcast. So, but yeah, I don't know if I mentioned already that I really, went down the rabbit hole of drinking the Kool-Aid as part of the prep for this in real life reality show project, and part of it came out of. It was the third project in a row, over the course of a few years, where I was focused on therapeutic practices for palliative care of some type and life coaching. So in this case, the whole project was actually delayed for a few months, and I had already gotten in touch with this biohacking life coach, Louise. And it was one of the few projects that really had quite a decent salary for doing it. And I thought, you know what, I'll just work with her myself and really get to know what this biohacking thing is about. And I think at the same time, I also was reading a biography about Stuart Brand, who started the Whole Earth Catalog. So really, which was, billed as the proto-internet, this publication where people commented on on, how to make the instructions from Buckminster Fuller of how to make the geodesic dome, or, what seeds to plant in what place, because it was all part of this hippie Baxter Lander movement that fed into Silicon Valley ethos and methods, and the whole acid testing then feeding into collaborative ideas and microdosing practices as they currently contribute to that Silicon Valley model of creativity and thinking outside of the box. But again, I digress. Point is, I really did start experimenting with a number of these biohacking things over the last, I suppose, 2 years, a little over 2 years, because I think I started with Louise the summer before I finished the project. So I started using Focus at Will, a Focus Music app, and these 25-minute Pomodoro sessions they're supposed to be work sprints, which I had one of my kind of contestants do in the reality show. But in his case, I had him also wear a shock wristband called Pavlok that shocked his wrist every time he didn't stay on his Google Drive tab to write his novel, because he was a ghostwriter and wanted to get back to his own novel. But it's only been during this pandemic era that I feel like I went back to some of the things that came up both for myself and for others in the project, and started to get into them in a more refreshing way for the first time. So I've never been a meditator before, but I did go back to the meditation apps that had been recommended and got really into one called Waking Up by Sam Harris. And it's 10 minutes a day. And then I also got into the Wim Hof breathing, which he's known as the Iceman, who builds his immune system and his tolerance of cold through this kind of hyperventilating breath work and breath holding. So yeah, I definitely drank the insidious Kool-Aid that I was critiquing, and still feel hyper ambivalent about it all. But to begin with, I mean, it's what I'm interested in, is how you can be complicit in something that is both has a lot of potential and is part of perpetuating insidious systems and ideologies. But yeah, so I think those are the two main ones. And I did start recently watching that Goop reality show too. So yeah, I think, another thing that came up was 15-minute, taking these 15-minute walks outside or breaks from the screen. I got my first dog last spring, so I've been doing that a little more. But it's still a problem. It's too much. I feel I identified with the gig workers I worked with, where I spend way too much time in front of the computer and have neck problems and eye strain. So yeah, I could maybe I'll send to Shalom. I did also do a performance with a choreographer named Corey Kresge and a young playwright named Hannah Novak, where we went through sort of tongue-in-cheek but very helpful exercises for hands and eyes for honoring your relationship to the screen. So I can finally look for the video for that and try to share that.
Okay, good. A student named Sam Viola said that your presentation was amazing. Political piece was very relatable to this past one and showed the true emotion and frustrations these elections bring. And Lily Juneau, I really enjoyed your presentation. Thanks so much. I'm curious to hear more about the influence of dance in your life and your art. Was dance a very big part of your upbringing because of your mom?
It was, and it wasn't. I really, I did some dance when I was very young, and then I rejected it and very much identified as a photographer, as behind the camera. I was introverted in relation to my extroverted performer mother. So I think I had the typical sort of preteen and teenage rejection of the things that she was all about. However, because I was a photographer, I still got brought in for help to make the photographs for the dance company. I guess I'm sure I could have said no, so I must have been interested in it enough to do it once or twice a year, and then to start doing it for her dancers. But I think then it wasn't, maybe when I was 18 or 19, I got back into doing a little dance myself. So yeah, I think I have a very psychoanalytic relationship to dance, perhaps, in that respect. And and I don't know if we mentioned it, but Shalom was the only video artist I knew growing up, and his daughter was my best friend in middle school and high school, and we still keep up. So this was lovely to reconnect right now, and I was remembering how I probably never expected I would be doing exactly what he does in terms of being a video artist and teaching it.
Yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. And just to go back to that question, and we'll try to wind it up. I remember where you grew up, and the dance studio was the central part, of the loft, and all of your rooms were around it. So everything, whether you liked it or not, was centered on dance, and the fact that there was always rehearsals or your mother working out.
Exactly. Yeah, I grew up in a rehearsal space.
Yeah.
So there was, and I was dragged to a lot of performances, most of which I wanted to get out of, but then there were a few memorable ones. Like I got to, I was brought to an early Anna Deavere Smith one, and some other interesting downtown performance artists. I think Jennifer Sullivan.
I videotaped a lot of your mother's, especially things in public places, for over a few years. So, and I really see relationships. I'm not sure how conscious you are, but
I was in a show with her maybe 3 years ago now already, because I have a friend who's an artist named David Levine, who we have a lot of interesting strains in common in our work. And his mother is an artist as well, and he had this idea for years to do a parents show, and he finally did it at the Elizabeth Art Foundation about 3 years ago. So my mother, I asked my mother to do a performance, the most embarrassing performance that I recalled, where she lifted up her skirt suddenly in the middle of a solo and said, "Get back inside, get back inside." And I had her, and she did a re-performance of it, but it was also kind of narrated and commentary. So she re-performed parts of it and then also gave the commentary, walked around and explained, stand-up comic-ish,
Carly, can you update us on the number of people still watching and our time situation?
Yeah. I'm happy to keep going if people are hanging on, but also I get it.
Let me ask you the next question. and this goes back to what you said before, but would the current pandemic influence your future art projects and your development process? And part of, I think, a lot of us feel stuck, a lot of the students feel stuck. What keeps you going through the challenges of time, and how is there a way to think about how it might impact what you do?
Yes, I think it definitely is and will affect what I do. Right now, I had a lucky sort of invitation that may or may not go anywhere from a judge in San Diego who got in touch with me in June because the courts had been shut down due to COVID, and she had just resumed proceedings and was doing them via video for really the first time in any major way. And she said that her and her colleagues were confronting a lot of challenges with this method of pursuing justice, and that it was very, challenging to assess witness credibility, for instance, through this, and that actually some of the decorum of the court was being lost. There was a sort of high level of intimacy almost that maybe was misconstruing. And anyhow, so we've been in conversation ever since, and teamed up with a nonprofit called National Association of Women Judges. And right now I've been involved, over the summer I was doing some grant writing, but then they hired a grant writer, and we're trying to do a series of educational videos for judges on this issue of isolation and communication via video, as well as some of the wellness issues that someone else just asked about, because suddenly all of these judges are having to spend their days at the computer, having screen fatigue. So, and it's something, it's maybe perhaps more of an applied arts thing that I'm doing that I never would have expected, but I got quite excited about, and I feel somehow that I know it will lead to something else, but I don't know what. I think, we have no choice but try to work with our constraints productively. And it's okay that they are frustrating, that the constraints are frustrating. And that is usually part of any process, that, you delineate, you either receive an assignment or you delineate an assignment for yourself when you come up with your own projects. And those are constraints that you push up against and are both generative and productive and frustrating. So I think it's really about recognizing that, you don't want to let the frustrating dimensions demoralize you too much, and try to see it as part of any learning process. And I think that, I still look for any project I'm doing to become a learning process. I think about it, I have a young child, so I even think about it with her, having seen her develop from a baby into a toddler, that there's no crawling and there's no walking without this frustration of something is out of reach, and I have to figure out how to get there. And you don't get it the first time you try. But I think, especially if you have if you work with the camera in some form, there's a lot that you can still do with learning how to direct others or film them from further away. with telephoto lenses, or, getting people, they're still having film productions nowadays by getting tested and getting together. So in a way, so that also then can become this pressure cooker situation of, you get a few people together for a short amount of time where you're locked in together after all having a clean bill of health. There are different ways to, whether, both remotely and through a lot of planning, to move forward.
Okay. Can someone just update the audience numbers? And 'cause I think we've gone about a half an hour.
Yeah.
That it was longer than what we expected. A lot of good questions, and Carlin, Edward, anybody?
17 people right
Yeah.
now.
Okay. All right. I'm hearing that there's 17 people left. And maybe just this one last question, Dana. And she's basically asking again about the primal therapy. And I wasn't sure from your answer before whether primal therapy worked for the people who were doing it, and whether you think it's, according to this question, do you think it would be good for reducing stress and a safer way to release anger?
I don't think it's that useful. In the end, I became interested in it because of its, because of its resonance with method acting, and again, because of this strange situation of radical therapeutic and countercultural practices being adopted in the name of profit, where these primal therapists were now becoming executive coaches, for instance. But I do think I'm more subscribed to this behaviorist notion of, you smile and you feel happier, that I think I brought up during it. I think, both has credence, but it has limits, where I think releasing your anger and rehearsing it repeatedly, I think probably fosters anger at the end of the day. I think there's a fine line between emotional release and repetition reinforcement. So it can go either way, but that's why, I think the way I used it as, experiments that don't get repeated a ton by the same people, it could be worthwhile that way, but yeah, and I wouldn't, I think it went out of vogue for a good reason. But yeah, I mean, it's something I'm thinking about a lot. And of course, anger and the inflammation I mentioned, and this kind of inflammatory culture that has emerged and accelerated over the last 4 years. So, and I think these things are, again, all contextual to time and place. I think right now, do we need to be rehearsing and repeating our anger? I don't think it's helpful right now. But maybe,
All right. Anne Lepore writes, your critiques of existing structures are really successful. As a very, very active member of civil society, what to create?
Yeah. It's a great question, and really challenging to answer, and it makes me think of generally my critique of critical theory is that it's tearing down rather than proposing, and it's also perhaps something that I take issue with some of the kind of social media tendencies these days. If it's much easier to accuse or critique or point out flaws than to propose, and it's the same for me. At the end of the day, I'm not a politician or a social scientist in government. So I think from my perspective, I can imagine, and I do with my work, different amalgams and forms of conversation and discourse, working off of pre-existing forms. So yeah, I think I don't know that I have with my words any better proposal than I've come to with my projects of imagining ways of having a physical conversation or an emotional, psychological conversation with those you disagree with. And I don't think that I've gotten or been presented really with the possibility yet, and perhaps it's my responsibility to seek it out, of how these structures could really be something that, or how a new platform for public conversation and political debate could be put forth. But I'm not there yet. Do you have any ideas?
And and said something about unstructures.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's what you were saying about critical theory is.
Yeah, and it also makes me think of how anonymity both can bring out to people's more spiteful side, but then perhaps there's something there to be mined, to have anonymous verbal conversations instead of all in comments on a social media post. That might be something worth pursuing on a grander scale.
Mm-hmm. There's so much more to talk about, and I thought your presentation was great, and everything that you're doing, you have putting into context and with historical references, and it's very ambitious and so interdisciplinary, which we hope for from our students, interdisciplinary thinking. And I think that the new forms will come out of the experiments, and things, the technology sort of goes hand in hand. But, I really appreciate your generosity in doing this for us. And, we thought you would be a perfect person to have, because your work relates to, this exact process. So,
thank you so much for having me and for all of the great questions.
Thank you.
Yeah.
For those of you who joined in and who've stuck with us, there's still quite a few people, and that's great. So I actually don't even know how to start.
I don't know how to end.